Welcome to Category Visionaries, the show dedicated to exploring exciting visions for the future from the founders who are on the front lines building it. In each episode, we'll speak with a visionary founder who's building a new category or reimagining an existing one. We'll learn about the problem they solve, how their technology works, and unpack their vision for the future. I'm your host, Brett Stapper, CEO of Frontlines Media. Now let's dive right into today's episode. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Category Visionaries. Today we're speaking with Adam Weinstein, CEO and co-founder of Writ, a BI platform that's raised $3.8 million in funding. Adam, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
No problem. Let's go ahead and jump right in. Talk to us about what you're building today.
Yeah, so we're building a platform that's really focused on operational reporting. Sort of think of it as the day-to-day version of what you'd use to build, reports and updates for a data organization and business team that they partner with. And, I think we're looking at a way to do something that is a bit more conversational and interactive than what most products in the market are doing today.
I feel like you could only have an idea like this if you were deeply embedded in this world. So talk to us about the founding of the company and what you were doing before having this idea.
Great question. Yeah, I spent the first half of life, I would say, as an analyst, or at least professional career life. And from being someone whose job it was to answer questions for all different parts of a business, using arguably every BI tool under the sun, from Tableau to Power BI to Looker to Business Objects and Oracle, I've sort of found this pattern that repeated itself time and time again, which was somebody would ask a question that inevitably drove to digging into data and building some chart graph or set of charts and graphs in a dashboard. But then you had to end up explaining it in some other tool. You could never kind of finish the job in the tool that you started it with. So that usually meant moving to a PowerPoint deck or later a Google slide deck, or maybe you're writing an email or a Slack message. And so there was this separation between sort of where the discussion took place and the decisions were being made and the actual data itself living in, some sort of a dashboard. And as a result, as time went on, you sort of had this almost sort of separation or divergence of like where the knowledge was. Like you couldn't find it. It was spread across emails, decks, documents, and then some number of dashboards that inevitably were harder and harder to find as time went on. And so as we look at kind of the way the world works today in terms of collaborative tooling, we saw an opportunity really to just build something that mapped the way modern business and data teams work together, and didn't see anything on the market that did that. And so that's what inspired us to build Writ.
Now, today's going to be all about Writ, but I want to go back a little bit and talk about the first data company that you built and then had acquired or sold the company. Talk to us about that first data company.
Yeah. So Jason and I started a company called Cursor. It's been 7+ years ago at this point. And Cursor really was born out of an experience that I had at LinkedIn, where I had the fortune of being able to work on a lot of sort of the thorny data privacy and security problems that we faced as a large, arguably social media business, although it was more focused on kind of the B2B side of social media. And as a lot of regulations were coming out, whether it was a GDPR or a CCPA, there were a number of obligations that we had as a company that, some pretty serious investment and tooling to build to support those. And looking at that and sort of solving that problem as a company that wasn't a Bay Area company with thousands of engineers to throw at it, realized there was an opportunity to build a business, building what we call the data catalog to help companies understand, how their data was being used, where it was, and I guess their obligations as it related to kind of newly enacted regulations. And so, we started that in early 2017. One of our early users was a company called DataRobot, which was a automated machine learning platform. At least at the time, that was really their focus. And they were actually using it in an innovative way, which was using it to help them discover data that could be used for machine learning. So basically how you could find features to support and build better models. And as it turned out, made an offer to buy the business and acquired it in early 2019. And I kind of joke, like we left the party at 11. We don't know if it was going until sunrise or 2 a.m., but it was still a great outcome. DataRobot was a really fun place to be during a kind of a crazy ride in the AI space, which really continues today. And as I ended up helping the product organization and Jason on machine learning side of things, and decided after a few years there to go back and do it one more time.
Does any part of you regret selling? Because you were 2 years into that journey?
Yeah, not even. It's interesting to think about in hindsight. I think, what we knew at the time versus what we know today. I think the one thing I'll say that I think is supportive of selling was my thought going into that business was that there was going to be a slew of regulation that came out that was going to be difficult for companies to manage or sort of wrangle on their own. And so you were going to have this need, almost like sales tax works today, where every state has their own laws and companies oftentimes employ software to help them manage kind of sales tax obligations, even though you would think it's simple. You got 50 different states and arguably even international sales tax obligations. It's very complicated to manage kind of all those different rules and regulations. So I thought the same thing was going to happen with data privacy. It turns out it didn't. GDPR and CCPA were, rather close together, but then you had a pretty large break. There's just recently a European data directive, but that took 7+ years to really come to fruition. So the market didn't turn out to be as big as we thought. On the flip side, a lot of the competition that we saw when we were operating in, call it 2018, which is really kind of the core of when we existed, went away. And so I do think there would have been an opportunity to build a big business. The category is not huge, but like we could have had, I think, a nice chunk of it if we would have stuck around. So yeah, no, I don't regret it, but I do oftentimes play what if.
Yeah, I think that's human nature to play what if. Now, what would you say was the biggest learning that you took away from that entire experience? I'm sure there's a long list of things that you learned, but if we had to choose like one big learning, what would that be?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you ask in that way. I think category creation is really hard, right? Like I think, messaging in particular when it comes to category creation, we weren't the first company to use the phrase data catalog, but I think the way we were approaching it, particularly like, helping analysts understand their obligations and how they use data and sort of requirements and security side of privacy and regulations was new. And that was tricky to like, how do you sell that? Like, who's your sponsor? Is it an analyst that really cares about this, or is it a legal team or a chief data officer? And how do you get in the door when they don't know that they need something? I think the sort of counter argument to that is you just need to go, right? And we were joking earlier, right? Go part of go to market. You just need to keep trying different things. But when you're creating a category, you always kind of overthink a little bit. Okay, what is the first message you bring to market? And that tends to stick with you longer than you'd like, just because you're the first. So yeah, learnings, I think, on category creation for sure. And then I also think learnings around data tools and how you sell data tools. It still remains a sticky problem, and one that I think we're going to hopefully reuse a lot of that in this business, which is you can take them to a certain point, but inevitably you're not going to be able to usually close a deal without some legal or security person in the loop. And regardless of how painful the problem is and how much someone's hair is on fire, they've got some regulation they have to go by a certain date, or they get fined by a government. Even if that's their pain, which is a great pain to have as a software company that can hopefully solve it, you're rarely going to be able to have a swipe a credit card solution as a data tool. Like it's just a category that almost always has contracting and back and forth that takes longer than you'd like.
This show is brought to you by Frontlines Media, a podcast production studio that helps B2B founders launch, manage, and grow their own podcast. Now, if you're a founder, you may be thinking, I don't have time to host a podcast. I've got a company to build. Well, that's exactly what we built our service to do. You show up and host, and we handle literally everything else. To set up a call to discuss launching your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. Now, back to today's episode.
If we look at the problem that you're setting out to solve with Writ and the category that you're going to be playing in, what was it about this category and this problem that made you say, yep, that's it, round two, I'm going at it again? I'm sure there's probably a long list of different problems you could have tried to solve. Why this problem?
Yeah, and we looked at a lot of different problems. I mean, I think the data space is big, but it's also crowded. I think the thing that really got us to the point of, yes, this is what we want to go do, it's sort of twofold. One is we talked to a number of analytics leaders and analysts about solutions in the market and really where they fell short. And most of this goes back to, you look at the tools that have the majority of revenue today. So your Tableaus, your Power BIs, things like that. They were built really a desktop computing era. People downloaded the tool, they built their report, and yes, you would push it to a server so that your colleagues could view whatever dashboard you created. But the experience went back to an era when things weren't really web-based. And everyone today lives in a collaborative something, whether it's a Slack or a Figma or a Jira, Linear, whatever you want to call it. Like most teams have a tool that they live and breathe in that is multiplayer. And data, especially on the create side, is predominantly not. The majority of revenue is in tools that are single player on the creative side. Now you can view the dashboard as multiple people at the same time, but that editing experience is not. And then secondly, like this way people work together and sort of the role of a data team, maybe 5 to 15 years ago, data teams were sort of disconnected from the business. They were almost service desks where somebody would ask for, hey, I need this data pulled, show me the latest ABC. And the team would perform that ask and then give back a dashboard. And that would be kind of the end of it. Or maybe there'd be a second request that comes as a result. Now you're seeing data teams that are extremely strategic and they're just as thoughtful about kind of the goals of the business as they are about understanding the data behind it. And the tools don't really support that kind of collaboration. I think, the days of a disconnected data team that simply take requests and fulfill them, I think are over. And I imagine if you're still operating that way, you're probably going to fall behind quickly. So we saw this sort of two things happening, right? Where tools were single player and then also data teams were becoming increasingly strategic. And we felt like there was an opportunity to build software that kind of mapped to those two dimensions.
Now, I know you're early in the go-to-market journey. So let's talk about this, or let's frame this around the plan and the go-to-market strategy. What does the go-to-market strategy look like for the next 6, 12 months?
Yeah, so like you said, today we're still very early. We have a number of companies using the product, giving us feedback. That just started in the last quarter. We think in a space that has as much competition as this one does, there's benefits to really learn what hook kind of resonates the most, I guess we would phrase it, versus just using a lot of phrases that other folks already do as well. And so I think in terms of what we plan to do on go-to-market front, I think it's sort of twofold. One, I think we want to have people be able to come and try the product, experience it, understand what we do differently without having to go through any sort of hoop or trial or sales call. That said, I think there does need to be a person on this side that will help kind of shepherd that company, if it will be, through the process once they've decided, hey, we want to move forward. Sort of a sales assisted approach. But you should be able to understand what we do and experience the product without talking to a sales rep. I think that's important in today's era in almost every category. Maybe there's a few that still start with a phone call before you get access. And then I think a part of that is once you are kind of on board, having a sense of community, whether it's between users outside of your company walls or even within your company. I think baking community into a product and looking at companies like Notion or Figma or even Linear, I think has done a great job of this, and having people be able to share tips and tricks as to how they get the most out of a product is really important to being successful.
Let's talk about the website. So I was going to the website today and I've noticed the website that's very plain. It's just a simple landing page. Talk to us about that decision to just keep it simple and sweet.
Yeah, I think you become known by really your first marketing message, and it becomes really, really hard to change if you get through your first couple million of revenue with one message and you decide that, oh, wow, the rest of the revenue, the opportunity is at something slightly different. And so what we've done by design is we will go bring on 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 companies onto the platform, probably with something similar to what you see today, right? There won't be a sign up button. There won't be a whole lot. You can reach out to us. We get plenty of inbound of, hey, this looks interesting, but I can't really tell what you do. Tell me more, show me a demo, that kind of thing. But until I think we feel like we have a message that really is resonating and also one that can take somebody from a trial to a successful kind of experience, we'll stay pretty stealthy. And that's just a function of a crowded market, but a big one. I think we've seen that this launch something in 3 weeks, try it, let people swipe a credit card and use it. Doesn't always work with every enterprise market, especially this one. And so, yeah, we want to stay a little quiet. We can still reach out. I mean, I do a lot of that today and get people to come try the product. The product's live and we have people using it daily. But yeah, we'll keep it a little quiet in terms of what we do differently until we feel like we're really ready to roll.
I could be misreading it, but as you speak like someone who's felt a lot of pain from challenges with messaging, having the wrong message pushed out to market. Is that pain all from Cursor in that first company, or is that going even deeper? Is there kind of a long history where you had these challenges that you faced and you're dedicated now to make sure you don't have those problems again?
Yeah, I think certainly some of it was from Cursor. I think every company feels pain at every stage. I could talk about pain we felt at LinkedIn with messaging. I could talk about pain at ExactTarget. And those were incredibly successful businesses that had no problems with growth, but you would kind of always think hard, okay, if we would have tweaked this a little bit, could we have had a bigger opportunity? And I think if you look at data/AI today and the rate of change, there's something to be said about not locking something down too soon. Now, you don't want to wait forever. That doesn't help you either. But I think there's some benefit to kind of observing what the market does, how your users are using your product, and then finding something that feels like it's long lasting versus just committing to what feels like the first winning use case. And so, yeah, it's a double-edged sword waiting, right? Because you don't want to wait out the cycle per se. But I do think, yeah, there's been pain there. I think that's good pain. I kind of call it scar tissue, right? You learn from it, even though it may have some residual effect. But to me, that's healthy.
This show is brought to you by the Global Talent Co., a marketing leader's best friend in these times of budget cuts and efficient growth. We help marketing leaders find, hire, vet, and manage amazing marketing talent for 50 to 70% less than their U.S. and European counterparts. To book a free consultation, visit globaltalent.co.
What are the signals that you're going to be really looking at to say, okay, now is the time to go to market, to bring this message to market? We've got the right message. What's the criteria, or what are those signals going to be?
Yeah, that's a great question. It boils down to engagement, as silly as that sounds. So a lot of companies today that are using the platform are bringing on a use case or two where they've got one problem that they feel like their current solution is suboptimal for. They feel like what we're doing is a great opportunity to kind of try something new. We then, once that's hopefully onboarded, we then ask, okay, what is there that we can bring that might be on either a competitive platform or something you're just not able to solve today that we could use to grow kind of those use cases that we're able to solve. Once that process no longer is a pull and it's more of the user taking the initiative on their own, and you see continuous engagement not just from the data team building kind of updates or reports in the product, but also from the business team interacting with that content. That to me is the signal. And thus far, we've had good success with people continuing to use the product. In most cases, it's resulted in like, hey, can you add this one feature so I can solve this additional part of the problem? I think that's sort of the back and forth that we're in now, which is a good thing to have, right? You've got people that are engaged, but that are looking for a little bit more to then, feel like it's a complete solution.
When you think about marketing channels, what are the big channels that you're thinking about betting big on? Or is that too early to say?
No, I think so there's a few things. Like I do think that you kind of need to do something unnatural at the early stages of a startup. And that usually means spending some money. You can spend money on content and evangelists and humans basically, or you can spend money on advertising. And I think you kind of need both just because you'll never be as well known as the big brands that have existed for 20 years, like a Tableau, like, Power BI hasn't been around 20 years, but it's Microsoft. So they've been around for a lot longer than 20 years. And so, yeah, I think we will probably spend money on Google, on LinkedIn. It won't have the ROI that you hope it does because it's probably not predominantly brand building. But in order to get your name out there and talk about what it is that you do differently, like you do have to kind of go across channels just to get started. And we'll do that when the time is right. Once we've got kind of the messaging ironed out, like we just discussed.
Are there any channels that you're like, hell no, we are never going to do that channel? It doesn't make any sense. Don't want to pursue it?
Yeah, I think the consumer channels, particularly for enterprise data, probably don't make a lot of sense. So any sort of Facebook Meta property, as phenomenal as that channel is for consumer user acquisition, I think for what we're doing, probably not relevant. Same thing with a TikTok or some of these other, more consumer focused social media platforms. That said, you'd be amazed, like data Twitter is still very much alive, and that will probably be a place we experiment. I don't know what it does for conversion, but it may have some brand value. And so, yeah, there's probably that.
Let's talk about fundraising here. We're getting to our last couple of questions. So I mentioned there in the intro, you've raised 3.8 million to date so far. I know you raised money for your last startup as well. So we can maybe just keep this general. What have you learned about fundraising throughout your career?
Yeah, I think, storytelling is something that you can get better at for your entire career and still never perfect, right? And so how we told the story of what we're trying to build and what our sort of vision is something that I think is it's not an acquired skill, but it's one you can get better with over time. And so that was a part of the journey. We raised the money before we built any product, right? Which I feel very fortunate that we were able to do that. I know that if I went back 10 years and tried to do the same thing, I probably would not have been a possible thing, both in terms of storytelling skill, but also just, experience. Yeah, I think fundraising is also something that it's a great litmus test for whether or not your idea has legs. And certainly investors don't know the details of every category and every product, but they're really, really smart and they usually have a great pulse on the market. And so if for some reason, you're not able to find success fundraising, usually means it's a pitch or the product or both. And so I think we've had examples of both in our past where, the pitch wasn't right, the product was a little bit off or both. And it's not a bad thing that you don't get the offer or the term sheet, but it just usually means, hey, go back and tweak the story and keep trying.
How do you become a better storyteller? I think every founder knows they need to be a good storyteller, but doesn't mean it's easy to do. Do you have a book that's had a big impact on you or anything that you've done to really refine and improve at that skill?
It's interesting. Books, no. I felt very fortunate. I was able to work with a few folks at a company called Writ, which is how I got to LinkedIn, that were, world-class, to say the least, storytellers. And I learned a lot from them. That was Steve Goodman and Eddie Vivas, Eddie started it and Steve was CEO of the company. They both taught me a tremendous amount. And then I think LinkedIn, being the caliber of team it was when we got there, had a number of folks, particularly on the product team, that were, I think A+ storytellers. And between spending time there and really kind of getting to see, a company, Bray, which went from seed to Series B in a span of 18 months, and then, ultimately got acquired by LinkedIn. That was a great school of hard knocks learning lesson. And that taught me quite a bit, right? Whether it was from the deck to the actual narrative that you told in the room. I think I felt very fortunate to have been able to have that experience.
Final question for you. Let's zoom out 3 to 5 years into the future. What's the big picture vision look like here?
Yeah. So, if you look at the workflow of an analyst today and sort of the tools that they use, there's not a great record of all of the work that gets done, right? Between the dashboarding tool and then wherever else data ends up, right? The sort of email Slack deck that we talked about earlier. We want to be sort of the system of record for all of that content, the discussion, as well as the dashboard, as well as even the sort of data layer to some extent. And so part of that will be, how do we help automate that for the sake of the analyst and help them spend less time writing queries and writing the Friday update that inevitably looks 90% the same as the previous week, and using AI to do that, but also how do you help the business user have less asks of their data team and hopefully self-serve, which I think, BI has always had this self-serve label as sort of ambition, but I would say it's really not achieved that. So if you ask a C-suite member how often they can log into the reporting tool and get an answer without asking an analyst, it's usually never. So I think that the vision is to really build that, right? And to do it in a way that, applies some of kind of modern AI to do so, but it needs that understanding of how data works and what the sort of meaning of it is, which comes from that discussion, which is very specific to that individual business. And so between large language models, us being the platform for data teams and business teams to converse, and sort of modern tooling, I think we can build that. It's going to take some time, right? You've got to really get to know that business, both in terms of tech and conversation, and then use that to automate a lot of the process that today is manual and painful.
Amazing. I love the vision, and we'll have to bring you back on in a year or two just to update or get an update on the progress here that you've made. This has been a lot of fun. I think our audience is going to really enjoy this. Before we wrap up, if there's any founders that are listening in and want to follow along with this journey, where should we send them?
Yeah, you can just check out our website, writ.so, and feel free to email me. I'm just adam@writ.so, or email on the website as well. You're welcome to fill out there as well.
Amazing. Adam, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
This episode of Category Visionaries is brought to you by Frontlines Media, Silicon Valley's leading podcast production studio. If you're a B2B founder looking for help launching and growing your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. And for the latest episode, search for Category Visionaries on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.